6 workers went down, 5 came back up, and none of them would say what happened to the 6th. That's the version you've probably heard, some variation of it. It's the kind of story people reference without really knowing the details. Missing utility worker, sealed tunnel, crew won't talk. I need to correct something right now, because if I don't do it at the start, everything that follows will sit on a bad foundation. We talked. All 5 of us talked. To the company, to the union rep, to the OSHA investigators, to the NYPD detective they brought in when Danny's family pushed hard enough to get one assigned. We answered every question. We cooperated fully. The problem was not silence. The problem was that our answers didn't match. My name is Marco. I've worked infrastructure maintenance for Con Edison since 2014. Steam distribution mostly. That means I spend a significant portion of my working life underground, in tunnels that run beneath Manhattan, carrying pressurized steam through pipes that are, in some sections, over 100 years old. I need you to understand something about utility tunnels because people imagine them wrong. They imagine dark, dripping corridors with flickering lights, like a movie set. That's not what they are. Most of the time, they're hot, aggressively hot. The steam pipes run at temperatures that will kill you on contact. And even the ambient temperature in a working steam tunnel can sit at 110, 120 degrees. You wear protective gear. You carry water. You monitor your own core temperature. It's physically demanding, unglamorous work, and the tunnels themselves are not mysterious. They're mapped. They're measured. Every valve, every junction, every drainage point has a designation and a location on a set of engineering drawings that get updated regularly. I'm telling you this because what happened on November 9th, 2021, does not fit inside that world. And I've spent 3 years trying to make it fit, and I can't. And that's why I'm doing this. The job that day was a scheduled inspection of a segment designated as Steam Line 7, Section 14 East. It runs roughly beneath East 43rd Street, between Lexington and 3rd, at a depth of about 35 feet. Standard inspection protocol, visual assessment of pipe insulation, bracket integrity, valve condition, condensate drainage. We'd done this particular section twice before in the previous 18 months. I could have walked it blindfolded. The crew was 6. Victor Molina was lead Vic, everyone called him. 22 years on the job. Tommy Ferranti, about 15 years. Hargrove. His first name was Dennis, but nobody used it. Maybe 12 years. Nasir Osman, who we all called Naz, about 8 years. Me, 7 years at that point. And Danny Reeves, 9 years. Danny was my usual partner. In tunnel work, you pair up for safety. Danny and I had been paired for almost 4 years by then. I should describe Danny because later it will matter that he was a specific person and not a symbol. Danny was 34. He was from Astoria, originally. He had a 3-year-old daughter named Claire. He was calm in the way that some people are genuinely calm. Not performing composure, but actually settled inside himself. He noticed things. He was methodical. He didn't rush the parts that mattered, and he didn't get bored during the parts that didn't. He was the kind of partner you want underground. We entered the tunnel at 6:40 a.m. through an access point on the north side of 43rd near Lexington. Standard entry, hard hats, headlamps, protective suits, radios, gas monitors, the full kit. The first 40 minutes were unremarkable. We moved through the initial section, checked the primary valve cluster at junction 14E3, documented 2 insulation patches that were degrading, and reached the midpoint staging area, what's called a service alcove. Basically, a wider section where you can set down equipment and regroup. It was at the service alcove that Vic split us into pairs for the parallel inspection legs. This is standard. The tunnel branches at the alcove into two runs, a northern leg and a southern leg, that reconverge about 600 feet further east. Vic and Tommy took the northern leg. Hargrove and Naz took a lateral access corridor that connects to an older, partially decommissioned section. Danny and I took the southern leg. I want to be precise about this because precision is the only tool I have left. When Danny and I entered the southern leg at approximately 7:25 a.m., the tunnel was exactly what it was supposed to be: 8 feet wide, 7 feet high. Concrete floor with a shallow drainage channel on the left side. Twin steam pipes running along the right wall on steel brackets spaced at 30-inch intervals. Temperature was 114 degrees. Air quality reading was normal. Radio signal was strong. We could hear Vic on the northern leg without interference. We walked. The southern leg of Section 14 East is 287 feet long. I know this because I've looked at the engineering drawings more times than I can count since that day, and because 287 feet is a distance I can walk in my sleep. At our normal inspection pace, stopping to check brackets, tapping insulation, marking anything that needed follow-up, the southern leg takes about 18 minutes to traverse. At what I estimated was 12 minutes in, Danny stopped and said, "We should be at the elbow by now." The elbow is a 15-degree bend in the tunnel, about 190 feet from the alcove entrance. It's subtle. You barely notice the curve, but you feel it because the left wall starts to close in slightly before the tunnel straightens out again. Danny was right. At 12 minutes, at our pace, we should have been past the elbow. But the tunnel ahead of us was straight, dead straight. I turned and looked behind us, also straight. The alcove was no longer visible, which made sense. We'd walked far enough, but the elbow should have been under our feet or behind us by that point. I checked the distance on my pace count. I'd been counting unconsciously, the way you do when you've spent years measuring corridors with your feet. I had 206 paces. My pace underground, in full gear, is almost exactly 2.5 feet. That put us at roughly 515 feet from the alcove. The southern leg is 287 feet long. I recounted. I checked my stride against the bracket spacing. Those 30-inch intervals I mentioned. My stride matched the brackets the way it always did. The brackets were real. The distance was real. We had walked nearly twice the length of the tunnel, and the tunnel had not ended. Danny looked at me. "Did you get turned around?" I hadn't. I knew I hadn't. We'd walked in one direction from the alcove, and we hadn't turned. There was nowhere to turn. The southern leg is a single corridor. I have to be more honest now than I've been with anyone except my wife, and I didn't tell her everything either. The official incident report states that Daniel Reeves became separated from his partner, me, during an inspection of Steam Line 7, Section 14 East, at approximately 7:50 a.m. on November 9th, 2021. It states that I returned to the service alcove alone and reported him missing at approximately 8:15 a.m. It states that a search was conducted by the remaining crew, followed by a second search by a dedicated response team, and that Daniel Reeves was not located. The tunnel section was sealed pending further investigation. The investigation was closed 4 months later with a finding of unexplained disappearance, presumed workplace fatality, cause undetermined. All of that is accurate, but it's incomplete. Because what I told the investigators, what I told everyone, was that Danny and I became separated due to reduced visibility from a minor steam release. That's what I said. That's what I signed. There was no steam release. I lied. I'm going to tell you what actually happened. And I need you to understand that I've started this exact confession 4 different times over the past 3 years. With a counselor, with a friend, with a priest once. Though I'm not religious. Each time I stopped. Not because I was afraid of consequences. The company settled with Danny's family. The investigation is closed. Nobody's reopening anything based on what I say here. I stopped because every time I try to describe what happened, I become less certain that my description is accurate, not in the way memory naturally degrades. The event itself resists being organized into a sequence. It happened. I was there. But the shape of it won't hold still in my mind. I'm going to try one more time. After we realized the distance was wrong, Danny and I talked it through. It was a calm conversation. Danny was calm. I was working at it. We listed possibilities, miscounted paces, distracted by inspection tasks, walking slower than usual because of the heat. All plausible individually. None of them accounted for the margin. We were hundreds of feet past where the tunnel should have ended. Danny said, "Let's just keep going. It reconnects with the northern leg." I said, "Right." So we kept walking. Neither of us, at this point, felt anything you'd call fear. Confusion. A little professional annoyance. A faint embarrassment underneath that. Because utility workers do not get lost in tunnels they've walked twice before. The tunnel was well lit by our headlamps, plus the emergency strip lighting along the ceiling. Temperature was stable, air was clean, everything looked correct. It just went on longer than it should have. We walked for what I estimate was another 10 minutes. Danny was in front of me. 15 feet ahead, maybe. We'd stopped talking. I was counting paces again, carefully, and the number kept climbing past anything rational. The tunnel didn't change. Same pipe diameter, same bracket spacing, same brickwork on the upper walls where the concrete transitions to the original 1930s construction. Same drainage channel. I checked 3 brackets as we passed them. Standard hardware. Bolts oxidized at the rate you'd expect for their age. Insulation wrapping on the nearest pipe had the same manufacturer's marking I'd seen hundreds of times before. This wasn't a different tunnel. It was the same tunnel. It just contained more of itself than it was supposed to. At some point, and I can't give you the exact moment because this is where the sequence starts to lose its edges. Danny stopped. I nearly walked into him. He was staring at the left wall. I looked. The wall was the same, concrete to about 4 feet, then the transition to older brickwork above. But there was a section, maybe 8 feet across, where the mortar between the bricks was wet, not dripping, not leaking, damp. A dark discoloration in the joints, as if the wall had recently sweated and was in the process of drying. Danny pulled off his work glove and touched it. He looked at his fingers. Then he said something I have replayed in my head thousands of times. "This is warm." He was right. I touched it too. The bricks had a warmth that felt. And I know this sounds like I'm reaching specific, like a surface that has been recently pressed by something living. The way a seat holds heat after the person stands up. Danny said, "Feel that? It's regular." I pressed my palm flat against the bricks. There was a rhythm to the warmth, not a pulse exactly. A slow fluctuation. Warmer, slightly less warm, warmer again. A 4 or 5 second cycle, unmistakable once you noticed it. Danny looked at me. In the crossfire of our headlamps, his face had an expression I recognized from complex repairs. focused, engaged, interested, not afraid, not even cautious, just present with the problem. He said, "Something's behind this." I need to stop here and tell you about the other 4, because this matters for understanding why the story became The Crew Won't Talk. When the 5 of us regrouped at the service alcove, without Danny, and eventually made it to the surface, we were debriefed individually. Standard procedure after a lost worker incident. They separate you so your accounts don't contaminate each other. Vic and Tommy, who had taken the northern leg, reported a completely normal inspection. No anomalies, nothing unusual. They completed their section in the expected time and returned to the alcove without incident. Hargrove and Naz, who had taken the lateral access corridor, reported something different. Hargrove said the corridor was flooded, ankle-deep standing water for about a 60-foot stretch, which he noted was unusual but not unheard of. Naz, who was standing next to Hargrove for the entire inspection, said the corridor was completely dry. No water, not a puddle, nothing. When this came out during the debrief, it was treated as a stress response. 2 men, high pressure, one of them misremembering. Case closed. Except I talked to Naz privately about 2 weeks later. He was shaken. Not about Danny, though we all were about the discrepancy with Hargrove. Naz was firm. The corridor was dry. He'd written it on his inspection checklist in real time. Drainage channel clear, no standing water. Hargrove, meanwhile, had also documented the flooding on his own checklist, including an estimated water depth of 3 inches. Both of them had written documentation. Both were adamant. Both had been in the same corridor at the same time, side by side. I tell you this because it's the thing that finally made me understand. What happened to Danny and me wasn't isolated. The tunnel, all of it, not just our section, was not behaving consistently that morning. It was providing different physical information to different people who were standing in the same space at the same time. And the reason none of us would talk about it, the reason the story became what it became, is that we did try to talk about it. In the weeks after, the 5 of us compared notes 3 or 4 times. Every conversation made things worse. We couldn't agree on basic physical facts, the temperature, the lighting, the condition of specific valve clusters. The tunnel we had all been inside was not the same tunnel for each of us. So we stopped comparing. Not because someone told us to. No one pressured us. No one covered anything up. There was nothing to cover up. Danny was reported missing immediately. The search was real. The investigation was thorough. We stopped comparing notes because the disagreements were too fundamental to resolve without each of us questioning whether we could trust our own senses. And privately, independently, each of us decided that trusting our own senses was more important than reaching a shared account. I understand why, from the outside, that looks like silence. It wasn't. It was 5 men choosing sanity over accuracy. Back to the southern leg, back to Danny. After we found the warm section of wall, Danny wanted to keep going. I want to be honest about the dynamic between us at that moment, because it's the hinge that everything else swings on. Danny wasn't being reckless. He was being Danny. When something didn't make sense in a system he understood, he moved toward it. That's what made him good at the job. A bracket that's corroded in a way that doesn't match the pipe age. Danny walks over and looks. A valve reading that's off by a margin too small for most people to notice. Danny notices. He was built for inconsistency. It interested him the way a puzzle interests the kind of person who finishes puzzles. I was not that person. I'm competent. I do my job well. But when something doesn't make sense underground, my instinct is to stop, regroup, and come back with more people and better information. That's not cowardice, that's training, that's what you're supposed to do. So when Danny started walking deeper, past the warm wall, further into a tunnel that had already exceeded its own length by hundreds of feet, I followed, but I followed with resistance, a drag in my steps, a growing weight in my chest that wasn't heat exhaustion and wasn't fear exactly. It was the feeling of crossing a line I couldn't name. The tunnel ahead was changing, not fast, not like a transformation, more like a drift. The ceiling rose, maybe 18 inches over a span of 30 feet. The tunnel went from 7 feet to roughly 8.5. The brickwork on the upper walls shifted pattern. I noticed because I was scrutinizing everything by that point. The standard running bond, the staggered pattern you see in most brickwork, transitioned into what's called an English bond, alternating courses of headers and stretchers. Same brick, same color, same age as far as I could tell, but a different laying pattern, which usually means a different construction crew or a different phase of construction. The transition was seamless, no joint, no seam, no visible break in the mortar. One pattern simply became another, as if the wall had always been that way. Danny noticed it too. He ran his hand along the bricks without stopping and said, over his shoulder, "Different crew laid this section." He said it the way you'd note a change in paint color in someone's hallway, observational, unworried. The tunnel widened, 10 feet across now, maybe a little more. The twin steam pipes on the right wall continued. Same gauge, same insulation, same brackets at 30-inch intervals. But a third pipe appeared on the left wall. Same specifications, same everything. A pipe that does not appear on any engineering drawing I have ever seen for this section. Danny stopped and reached up. He knocked on the insulation wrapping with his knuckle, the way we test for integrity. Then he held his hand near the pipe without touching it. "It's live," he said. A pipe that doesn't exist on any blueprint was carrying live pressurized steam. Danny looked back at me. In the overlap of our headlamps, his face had something I can only describe as satisfaction. Not satisfaction like pleasure, satisfaction like confirmation. He'd suspected the tunnel was doing something real, something with actual infrastructure behind it, not a hallucination or a mistake. And now he had proof. He said, "This isn't old. Feel the brackets. The oxidation's wrong." I checked the nearest bracket on the phantom pipe. He was right. The bolt heads were clean. Not new, but newer than the ones on the mapped pipes. Maybe 5, 10 years of oxidation instead of decades. Someone had installed this pipe. Someone had connected it to the steam system. Someone had done this work in a section of tunnel that should not exist, and had done it recently enough that the hardware hadn't fully aged. Danny said, "I want to see where it goes." I said, "Danny, the radio's dead." He checked his own radio. Static. He wasn't surprised. "We'll go 5 more minutes. If it doesn't resolve, we turn around." I agreed. That's my confession. Not that I failed to stop him. That I agreed. I said okay. I made a conscious choice to keep walking. And I made it not because Danny pressured me, but because part of me, a small, honest part, wanted to see too. The next stretch of tunnel is the hardest part for me to describe, and I've tried dozens of times, not because it was traumatic, because the details resist sequencing. I remember individual moments clearly, specific images, specific sensations, but the order they occurred in shifts every time I try to reconstruct it. I'll do my best. The tunnel continued to widen. The floor changed. I remember that clearly. The concrete gave way to tile, small hexagonal tiles, white, with a thin black border every 12 inches or so. The kind of tile you'd see in a pre-war Manhattan building lobby or a very old subway station. They were clean, not dusty, not cracked, not stained with decades of tunnel grime. Clean, the way a floor is clean when someone maintains it. Danny stepped onto the tile floor without hesitating. I stopped at the edge. There was no rational reason to stop. It was tile, not a cliff. But the transition felt like a boundary. Behind me, the tunnel I knew stretched past its own dimensions, but still recognizably the infrastructure I'd worked in for 7 years. Ahead, something that used the same materials, the same visual language, but wasn't the same thing. Danny was maybe 25 feet ahead. He'd stopped too. He was looking up. I stepped onto the tile and walked to him. I looked up. The ceiling was high, much higher than a utility tunnel, maybe 15 feet overhead, arched, lined with the same brick in the same English bond pattern, but now forming a vaulted curve. The steam pipes ran along the walls on both sides, splitting into smaller lines that disappeared into the brickwork through fitted penetrations. Holes cut precisely to pipe diameter, sealed with mortar. Professional work. Whoever had built this knew what they were doing. This was not improvised. This was engineered. And it was lit. Not by our headlamps. There were light fixtures. Industrial caged bulbs, the kind you see in old mechanical rooms, mounted on the walls at intervals. They were dim, maybe 40 watts each, but they were on, drawing power from somewhere, controlled by something. Danny reached up and unscrewed one from its bracket. He looked at the base. "Standard Edison screw," he said. "Bulbs of Sylvania, you can still buy these." He screwed it back in. It flickered once when he tightened it, then held steady. I looked back the way we'd come. The standard tunnel was still there. I could see where the tile floor ended and the concrete resumed, where the ceiling dropped back to 7 feet. It was right there, maybe 60 feet behind us. The familiar world hadn't gone anywhere. We had simply walked past its edge into a space that existed alongside it, connected to it, drawing from the same infrastructure, but unmapped, unacknowledged. Danny said, "How long do you think this has been here?" I didn't answer because I didn't have an answer. The brickwork looked old, decades at least based on the mortar aging. The light fixtures looked like they could be from the 50s or 60s. The tile floor could have been from the 20s, but the third pipe, with its newer brackets, suggested someone had been here recently. Not decades ago, years ago, maybe less. Danny started walking again. The vaulted section continued ahead. I followed. "I need to tell you about the sound because Danny asked me about it, and I need you to understand my answer." About 2 minutes into the vaulted section, Danny stopped and turned to me and said, "Do you hear that?" I listened. I heard what I always hear in a steam tunnel, the low, pervasive hum of pressurized systems, the occasional tick of metal expanding, the distant ambient resonance of being underground in a city where the surface is never quiet. Nothing else. "I don't hear anything," I said. Danny frowned, not at me, at the air. He tilted his head the way you do when you're trying to isolate a frequency. "It's like a tone, steady, low." I listened again. Nothing. "I don't hear it, Danny." He accepted that. He didn't argue. He didn't insist I was wrong. He just nodded and said, "Okay," and kept walking. But something in his posture changed after that. He'd been walking with professional interest, shoulders square, head moving, scanning the environment the way we're trained to. After the sound, He walked with something closer to intention, like he was heading somewhere specific, like the sound had given him a direction. I should have stopped him. I should have said, "Danny, you're hearing something I'm not, in a place that shouldn't exist, and that's 2 reasons to turn around." I should have grabbed his arm and pulled him back the way we came. He wasn't a big man. I could have. I didn't. I followed, and every day since, I have sat with the question of why. I don't have a satisfying answer. The closest I can get is this. In that moment, stopping felt like the wrong kind of caution, not the smart kind, the fearful kind. And I didn't want to be the man who made Danny turn around because I was afraid, when Danny, who was hearing something I couldn't, was not afraid at all. Pride, that's what it was. I followed him out of pride. I need to say that out loud at least once. The vaulted section ended, not in a wall, not in a collapse. The tunnel simply returned to normal dimensions. 8 feet wide, 7 high, concrete floor, standard pipe runs, as if the vaulted space had been a single expanded chamber inserted into the middle of an otherwise ordinary corridor. But the corridor beyond it was wrong in a different way. The pipes were gone. Both walls were bare. Clean brickwork, no penetrations, no brackets, no mounting hardware. The ceiling had no light fixtures, just our headlamps again. The drainage channel was still there on the left side, but it was dry, and the concrete lip was sharp-edged, unworn, as if water had never run through it. Danny stopped. I stopped behind him. We stood there in the beam wash of our headlamps, looking at a tunnel that had all the physical characteristics of the one we knew. Dimensions, materials, construction era, but was stripped of everything functional. No pipes, no conduit, no cables, no valve stations, nothing that would give it a reason to exist. It looked like a tunnel that had been built and then never used. Danny took a step forward. His boots sounded different on the floor. A cleaner echo, the way your footsteps sound in an empty apartment versus a furnished one. He took another step. "Marco," he said, "come here." I walked to where he was standing. He pointed at the floor. There was a line, a literal line, scored into the concrete, running perpendicular to the tunnel's length, wall to wall, not a crack, not a construction joint. A deliberate mark, maybe 1/8 of an inch wide, cut into the surface with something precise. On our side of the line, the floor was the same dusty concrete we'd been walking on. Past the line, the concrete was darker, smoother, like it had been poured more recently or maintained differently. Or, and this is the thing I keep coming back to, used. Danny looked at me. "I'm gonna cross it." "Danny, I can still hear it. It's clearer now." "I can't hear anything." "I know," he paused. "That might be important." I didn't understand what he meant by that. I still don't, fully, but I think he was saying that the fact that he could hear the sound, and I couldn't meant the tunnel was distinguishing between us, responding to one of us and not the other, and that whatever was ahead, it had, in some sense, chosen him. He stepped across the line. Nothing happened. The tunnel didn't change. The air didn't shift. His headlamp beam moved forward into the same empty corridor. He stood on the darker concrete and turned back to me, and he looked exactly like himself. Same face, same posture, same Danny. "It's fine," he said. "Come on." I put my foot on the line, not past it, on it. I stood there with one boot on the scored mark and looked at Danny, who was maybe 6 feet past the line, looking back at me. And here's the thing I lied about. Here is the center of it. Danny didn't disappear. Danny didn't get swallowed by darkness. There was no sound, no flash, no collapse, no monster, no event. What happened was smaller than any of those things and worse than all of them. Danny turned away from me to keep walking. And as he turned, he was further away than he should have been. Not by a lot, by maybe 10 feet. He'd been 6 feet past the line. Now he looked like he was 16 feet past it. He hadn't moved quickly. He hadn't run. The distance between us had simply increased without either of us changing pace. I said his name. He half turned. 25 feet now. His headlamp was dimmer. Not because the battery was failing, but because the light had more air to cross before it reached me. The geometry of it was wrong. The tunnel was the same width. Danny was the same size. But the space between us was stretching, and it was doing it continuously, and Danny either didn't notice or didn't mind. Danny, stop. Stop walking. He did stop. He turned fully to face me. He was 40 feet away, then 50. I hadn't moved. He hadn't moved. We were standing still, both of us, and the distance between us was growing. His headlamp was a bright point now, like a star at the end of a hallway that was too long to be real. I could still see his face, just barely. The expression on it is the thing I have never been able to tell anyone. He wasn't afraid. He wasn't confused. He looked like a man who had just understood something. Something simple. Something that had been in front of him for a long time. And the understanding made sense to him. His face was calm, almost restful. The way you look when you finally remember a word that's been on the tip of your tongue. He raised one hand, not a wave, more like an acknowledgement. Like, I see you, I know you're there, this is all right. And then the distance won. He was too far away for my light to reach. His headlamp was a speck, then it wasn't even that. I ran, not toward Danny, away, back toward the vaulted section, back through the tiled floor, back along the impossible extra length of the tunnel that shouldn't have been there. I ran with everything I had, and the tunnel let me. Every foot I covered in retreat was a real foot. The distances worked in reverse. The vaulted section appeared where I expected it. The tile ended where it should have. The concrete resumed. The standard pipe runs came back. The brackets, the insulation, the drainage channel with its familiar dark staining. The tunnel cooperated with my departure the way a door cooperates with someone leaving a room. Smoothly, without resistance, as if leaving had always been the intended direction. I reached the service alcove in what felt like 12 minutes. The others were already there. Vic and Tommy were repacking their inspection kits. Hargrove was checking his gas monitor. Naz was drinking water. They looked up when I came in alone. Vic said, "Where's Danny?" And I said the thing I've been carrying for 3 years. I said, "We got separated, steam release, I couldn't find him." There was no steam release. I watched Danny walk into a space that was growing between us, and I chose to run the other direction, and I lied about it within minutes. They searched. Of course they searched. Vic and Tommy went into the southern leg immediately. Hargrove radioed for support. Within 90 minutes, a full response team was underground. 8 additional men, thermal imaging equipment, communication gear, the works. They found nothing unusual. The southern leg of Section 14 East was 287 feet long. It contained the standard 15-degree elbow at 190 feet. It terminated at the junction with the northern leg exactly where the drawing said it would. No vaulted section, no tiled floor, no phantom pipe, no scored line, no extra length. I went back down with the second search team. I walked the southern leg myself, retracing my steps from that morning. The tunnel was precisely, boringly, completely normal. Every bracket was accounted for. Every valve was in position. The brickwork was standard running bond from end to end. The space Danny had walked into was gone, not collapsed, not sealed, gone. The wall where it should have begun was original construction. Undisturbed mortar, consistent aging, no sign that anything had ever been different. They searched for 3 days, cadaver dogs on the first morning, ground-penetrating radar on the street above by day 2, camera inspections of every connecting corridor and drain line within 500 feet. Nothing. Danny Reeves was not in the tunnel. He was not in any adjacent space. He was not above ground, and he was not below it, as far as any instrument or animal or human being could determine. He was simply not there. The tunnel was sealed 11 days after the incident. This was a practical decision, not a conspiratorial one. A man had disappeared in a section of infrastructure. The cause was undetermined, and the responsible thing to do was restrict access until someone figured out what happened. No one ever figured out what happened. The seal became permanent by default, the way things do when there's no one left pushing to reopen the question. Danny's family was told what we all were told: unexplained workplace disappearance, presumed fatal, cause unknown. The company paid out the death benefit and the life insurance. His daughter Claire will have access to a trust when she turns 18. His wife, his ex-wife, technically they'd separated the year before, held a memorial service in Astoria in January 2022. I attended. I didn't speak. There was no cover-up. I want to say that again because I know how this sounds. No one at Con Edison silenced us. No one altered records. No one made us sign anything beyond the standard incident statements. The tunnel was sealed because a man vanished inside it, and no one could explain why. And sealing it was the cautious, boring, institutional response to a situation that had no better answer. That's all. The only concealment in this entire story is mine, my lie, the steam release that never happened. I've been to see Naz twice since the incident. The first time was the conversation I told you about, where he described the dry corridor, and we realized the tunnel had given us different realities. The second time was about 14 months ago. Naz had been thinking about it. He told me he'd started writing down everything he remembered about that morning, trying to fix the details before they faded. He said the act of writing was strange because certain details, specific things he clearly remembered seeing, couldn't be confirmed by the physical evidence. For example, he distinctly remembered a yellow-painted valve handle at a junction in the lateral corridor. He could see it in his mind, the exact shade of yellow, the slight rust at the base. But the maintenance records for that corridor show no yellow-handled valve. Every valve in that section has a standard red wheel handle. Naz remembers yellow. His inspection sheet, which he filled out in real time, doesn't mention it. But he says he wouldn't have noted the color because it wouldn't have been remarkable in the moment. Is the yellow valve real? Was it there that morning and isn't there now? Or did Naz's memory construct it? He doesn't know. I don't know. And that uncertainty, the impossibility of distinguishing between a space that changes and a memory that lies, is the thing that has been quietly disassembling all 5 of us from the inside. Tommy Ferranti took early retirement 8 months after the incident. He told Vic it was his knees. Hargrove transferred to a different division. Overhead cable work, above ground. Naz is still on steam, but he requested reassignment to a different section, and he will not enter Section 14. even the parts that remain open. Vic still works the same routes. Vic is fine, or appears to be. Vic has always been fine. Some people are built with a door they can close, and whatever is behind it stays behind it. I've never been able to tell whether that's strength or something else. I still work underground. I know people will ask why, so I'll answer it now. I still work underground because the tunnels are real. They are measured and mapped and maintained, and for every day of my career, except one, they have been exactly what they're supposed to be. What happened on November 9th, 2021 was an aberration. It was either a thing the tunnel did once, or a thing the tunnel does rarely, or a thing the tunnel is always doing that we are rarely in a position to notice. I don't know which. But I know that I've walked hundreds of miles of tunnel since that day, and none of it has misbehaved. The infrastructure is solid. The work is real. I'm not going to let one morning take that from me. But I don't walk the southern leg. That section is sealed, and I'm glad it is. Not because I think the sealed door is keeping something in. I don't think the space behind it is dangerous, exactly. I think it's indifferent. I think the tunnel expanded that morning the way a building settles, not with intention, not with awareness, just as a property of what it is. And Danny walked into the expansion, and it closed behind him, and the tunnel returned to its normal dimensions. And Danny is in the remainder, in the part that got folded back. I don't know if that makes sense. It's the closest I can come to what I believe happened. Here's the last thing. The thing I haven't told anyone, including Naz, including my wife, including the priest. When Danny raised his hand, that last moment, when he was 50, 60, 80 feet away, and the distance was still growing, he mouthed something. I couldn't hear it. The space between us was too large, and there was no sound crossing it anyway. But I could see his lips move. I've thought about it every day. I've replayed the image so many times that I'm no longer certain I'm remembering the original or remembering my memory of it. But I believe, with the kind of belief that has no evidence behind it and no argument against it, that what he said was, "It goes somewhere. Not help me, not come back, not a warning and not a plea. A statement, calm, observational, Danny-like in its precision." He was telling me what he'd learned in the last moment when telling me was still possible. The tunnel went somewhere. The sound he'd been hearing was coming from a destination. And he had reached it, or was reaching it. And it was not a dead end, and it was not a trap. It was a place. That's the thing I carry, not grief. Though there's grief, constant and heavy, for Claire especially, who is 6 now and has his eyes. Not guilt, though the guilt is there too, a permanent resident. What I know is that Danny walked into a part of the world that I could have followed him into, and I chose not to. And the expression on his face, in that last moment before the distance swallowed his light, was not the face of a man who needed saving. It was the face of a man who had arrived. I don't know where. I don't know how. I don't know if the tunnel will ever open like that again, or if it opens every day and no one walks far enough to find it, or if it opened that one time for Danny specifically, because Danny was the kind of person who would keep walking when the geometry stopped making sense. I know that 6 men went down and 5 came back. I know that I told everyone we couldn't find the 6th. And I know, I've always known, that the truth is worse than that and simpler. I didn't lose Danny. I left him. The southern leg of Section 14 East is 287 feet long. It's on the drawings. It's in the records. It has been measured and walked and inspected 100 times by 100 different crews. It is exactly as long as it says it is, except once. Except for us. Except on a morning in November when the tunnel decided, for reasons I will never understand, to be longer, to go further, to go somewhere. And Danny, quiet, methodical, steady Danny, was the one who wanted to see where. I think about Claire. I think about her growing up without him. I think about the memorial in Astoria, and the flowers, and the photographs, and the things people said about a man they're told is dead, but whose body was never found. And then, in the worst moments, the 3 a.m. moments, the ones I can't steer away from, I think about the possibility that Danny is not dead, that wherever the tunnel went, Danny went with it, that he is standing somewhere right now, in a corridor that doesn't appear on any drawing, under lights that shouldn't be on, listening to a sound I couldn't hear. And he is fine. And he is not coming back. Not because he can't, because he arrived, because it goes somewhere, and Danny found out where, and wherever that is, it was enough for him to keep walking. That's not comfort. I want to be clear about that. It's not comfort and it's not closure, and it doesn't help me sleep. But it's what I have, and for 3 years it's been sitting in my chest like a stone I swallowed that's too heavy to pass and too deep to reach, and I am tired. God, I'm so tired of carrying it alone. So now you're carrying it too. I'm sorry about that, but I'm not sorry enough to take it back.